Hey, everybody. It is Monday, December 16th. You're listening to the Mo News podcast on this second to last full week of 2024. I'm Moshe Wanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to, and track the calendar. Jill, just 2 weeks left in 2024.
Moshe, the year flew by.
Yeah, but we should note a headline for you on the song you've probably heard in, well, basically everywhere. All I Want for Christmas Is You, Mariah Carey, officially broke yet another record in the last week. It has now hit the 2 billion stream mark on Spotify, the first holiday song ever to break that record. And it's been the number one song on Spotify on Christmas Day every year since 2016. I imagine that'll be the same again this year. Where do you land on that song, Jill?
10 out of 10. What about you?
Well, I think I can listen to it probably 20 to 30 times. And then I don't know, I estimate that over the holiday season. And then I think I hit my limit on it.
So I will say a 10 out of 10, but I have not streamed it. You know, I'm not in the number of people I'm not propelling it to number one. You
don't account for any one of the 2 billion streams that's gotten on Spotify.
No, I wouldn't have even thought to play it, actually.
Because it's being played everywhere else you go.
But when I hear it, I love it. If it's on the radio, I will not change the channel. So yeah, I'm a fan.
I agree with that. If it's on, you leave it on until the next song comes on. I should note also, since we try to follow up on our What We're Watching, Reading, and Eating from Friday, we ended up catching the Elton John documentary on Disney Plus over the weekend. Also 10 out of 10.
Oh, good.
It's just the prolific. He, I think, put out 11 albums in a 5-year period between 1969 and 1976. It's incredible, actually. Just like hit after hit. I think he had a time period where he put out 4 albums in 2 years. Just incredible. And so it tracks a bit of that history, and then also learn the history behind John Lennon's final live performance was at Madison Square Garden, performing with Elton John in the mid-70s there, and is actually the reason why John got back with Yoko. So I won't spoil anything else from the doc, but thought if you're into Elton John, into that whole history, definitely worthwhile at some point during the holidays.
All right, let's get to some news here. Donald Trump vows to end daylight saving time. How realistic is that?
The most talked about story of the weekend.
It came as we got reporting this weekend that Trump is also looking to privatize the U.S. Postal Service amid financial losses. And another story that everyone is talking about, the federal government dismissing drone threats as New Jersey residents, including former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, continue to spot them over their homes and ask for answers. Those drones, by the way, spotted over Long Island as well this weekend.
You guys had to get in on it.
Of course. New Jersey can't have all the fun. All right, in a mix of media and politics, ABC News ends ABC News anchor George Stephanopoulos apologized to Donald Trump and agreed to pay $15 million to settle a defamation lawsuit. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi is recovering from hip surgery after she fell in Europe. The U.S. government confirms that it is communicating with the Syrian Islamist rebel group that has taken control of the country, even though that group is still on the U.S. terrorism list. And it comes as a missing American citizen has been rescued from a Syrian prison. Who he is, fallout from that short-lived martial law situation in South Korea. And back here at home, the suspected killer of United Healthcare's CEO has hired a lawyer with a surprising connection to Sean Diddy Combs' lawyer.
It's going to be the busiest legal couple in New York next year.
And then the backstory on why global coffee prices have climbed to 50-year highs. And Moshe is on this day in history.
Your clue today, so you're saying there's a chance.
All right, to the news. Let's start with that story that got the most number of messages this weekend. Is daylight saving time seriously on the way out? President-elect Trump announced late last week that he wants to end daylight saving time when he takes office, calling it inconvenient and costly to our nation in a Truth Social post on Friday. So a little background here, our clocks are currently in standard time. So Trump's proposal would mean what most Americans are experiencing would continue all year round. If they moved ahead with legislation on this, the upcoming daylight saving time we spring ahead to in March of 2025 could be our last. Year-round standard time would mean an end to switching clocks twice a year. It would result in slightly earlier sunsets in the summer, but would also prevent really late sunrises in the winter. A 2023 poll from YouGov found that 62% of Americans want to stop changing the clocks altogether. The catch, there's little agreement on whether we should permanently stick to standard time, which is what we're in now, or daylight saving time, which is an hour forward, which would mean that the sun sets a bit later. Most sleep experts agree with Trump about sticking to standard time year round. That's because morning sunlight would be preserved, helping to regulate our circadian rhythms, which would control sleep, wake cycles, and overall health. They also say the abrupt time shift each spring disrupts this balance and makes it harder to fall asleep at night and wake up on time in the morning. Studies have even linked daylight saving time to higher rates of heart attacks, strokes, and automobile accidents during that adjustment period. In 2020, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine called for the abolition of daylight saving time, but it really comes down to Congress to make the change, and it is not clear that there's enough support. Back in 2022, the Senate unanimously passed a bill to have permanent daylight saving time, which is the opposite of what Trump wants. But that bill died in the House. A similar effort failed in 2023. So come January, Republicans will have a slim majority in both chambers. I don't know, Moshe. Does this stand a chance?
Listen, if they make it a priority, I think it does. The fact that the Senate actually, again, did the opposite a couple of years ago, trying to make daylight saving time permanent as opposed to standard time permanent, shows that they're open to something here. Now, this is a debate we've been having for more than 100 years. And I know some people believe that daylight saving time has something to do with farming. It has nothing to do with farming. Effectively, it started back in 1918 in the middle of World War I as an attempt to conserve energy. The thought was that shifting daylight hours would reduce the need for artificial lighting at work with later sunset. Now, it's not clear based on the research the past 100 years or so that it's actually done that. We should note after World War I, daylight saving time actually went away. And then in 1966, it basically was codified. So a bunch of states had kept it between the teens and the 60s. And then it effectively became national. Now, in the 1970s, we actually did make something similar here, but Nixon tried to make daylight saving time permanent during the energy crisis. Congress passed it. It was initially popular. 80% of Americans approved it. Several months later, support was down to 40%. It turns out that people did not like driving to work and school in the dark. By making daylight saving permanent as opposed to standard permanent, that means really late sunrises in the morning in the winter. So it led to an increase in traffic accidents, kids at the bus stop, et cetera. So effectively, Congress overturned it a year later there in 1974. So now we sit here 50 years later, and we're having this discussion again because we continue to be annoyed about changing the clock twice a year. And we should mention this is effectively the deal in almost every state in the union, but not all. Again, with standard time becoming permanent here, you're not going to get those 9 p.m. sunsets, but you'll get 8 p.m. sunsets in the summer. You just won't get 9 a.m. sunrises in the winter. You'll still be 8 a.m. sunrises. And again, doctors here say this is much more in line with the Earth, with how we respond to light, with our hormones, with our circadian rhythm, that effectively, while some of you are pushing for daylight saving time to be permanent, standard time being permanent, even if it means that you don't get those like late sunsets in the summer, is still better for all of us here. And we should mention this is part of the agenda for DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, run by Vivek Ramaswamy and Elon Musk. Among their many agenda items, and they tweeted this over the weekend, is pushing for an end to switching the clocks twice a year. And that would really be the net positive here as we continue to debate like light versus dark, morning versus evening. It just ends the whole twice a year phenomenon that we've been having here for decades.
And it has worked in other countries. Mexico ended daylight saving time for most of the country 2 years ago. China, India, and Russia do not use daylight saving time. In the US, Hawaii, and most of Arizona, they actually don't change the times twice a year. Several US territories, including Puerto Rico, American Samoa, Guam, and the US Virgin Islands, also do not apply daylight saving time. So we wouldn't really be outliers if we went back to sticking with standard time.
And I imagine many parents out there will breathe a sigh of relief if this can come to an end.
All right, another one of President-elect Trump's proposals making waves. According to sources close to him, Trump has said he wants to privatize the USPS, or the U.S. Postal Service. It comes as the Postal Service has lost billions of dollars for years and is in dire need of reform. Trump says he doesn't want the government to subsidize USPS because of its huge annual financial losses. In the most recent fiscal year, the USPS lost about $10 billion, in part because of the national decline in sending snail mail and a slower than expected package shipping business. Financial reports also show that USPS faced nearly $80 million in liabilities like pensions and debt. At the same time, privatizing the Postal Service could have the effect of disrupting shipping timelines and costs and affecting business supply chains that get us those goods. It could also mean hundreds of thousands of federal workers could lose their jobs. Any major reform would likely require an act of Congress. It is unclear if Trump has that kind of support. Many Republicans represent rural districts that would be disproportionately impacted by changes in the Postal Service because the government-run agency is often the only delivery service required to reach remote areas. Trump has reportedly been discussing privatizing the Postal Service with his Commerce Secretary nominee, Howard Lutnick, all part of his team's goals to cut costs in the federal government, with the post office as the latest target. The Washington Post reported that Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy, who are leading the Department of Government Efficiency, aka DOGE, in the incoming administration, were also part of some preliminary conversations about a potential post office overhaul. If somehow Congress did approve privatizing the Postal Service, it would likely be required to scale back delivery services immediately, especially to unprofitable areas. So again, those would be the most remote regions. It would also likely downsize its staff by about 650,000 employees.
Yeah, that's the big deal here. I heard from some of you who live in Alaska in certain areas where you're like, I have to already travel miles to get to a post office. And that's because the Postal Service still has a universal service obligation, which means that oftentimes the Postal Service has to pay to ship items. The government has to subsidize basically rural areas using planes, helicopters, hovercrafts, dare I say drones to get to homes in far-flung regions. A report back in 2014, so this is 10 years ago now, said it actually costs the U.S. government $21 to get a 12-pack of Coke to a person's home in western Alaska. And again, those are the numbers from 10 years ago. So without the USPS, though, those areas would not be able to access things like fruit, frozen meat, dog food, diapers, other essentials they rely on from the rest of mainland USA. There's a whole program there called the Alaska Bypass that subsidizes some of those costs, so it's not as expensive for them. And that's the thing here, as the Postal Service has this universal service obligation, right? We all take for granted that we have a mailbox, and the Postal Service, somebody will show up every day for the most part, and then we can leave mail there for them to either take it or leave something for us, right? Now, one interesting aspect to all of this, Amazon is the number one consumer of the U.S. Postal Service, often using them as the, quote, last mile delivery, taking packages from fulfillment centers to people's homes. So is there some sort of tie-up there? Is unclear, but there does need to be a recalibration here, Jill. If you just look at the Postal Service numbers, the last 10 years, year by year, starting in 2014, they lost $5.5 billion, $5.1 billion, $5.6 billion, $2.7 billion, $8.8 billion, $9.2 billion. I can keep going on, but those are the annual losses for the Postal Service. So there's been a whole reform effort here, and it just hasn't been effective. And so this is something that Trump and company really want to take on these next 4 years.
The Postal Service says that most of its losses, about 80%, are fixed costs like pensions for its retired employees and workers' compensation. They say mail costs are not going to go up at the start of next year, but starting in the middle of the year. July 2025 prices will go up every January as well, and July through 2027. Still, despite this 10-year modernization plan, projections show the agency will end fiscal year 2025 with nearly $7 billion of net losses.
One thing we should keep in mind here, the Postal Service is Americans' second favorite agency in the federal government. National Park Service is number one. 3 out of 4 Americans like that. 72% of Americans like the Postal Service, right? Because there's this idea that, like, no matter what, it'll be there, right? Rain or shine, snow, etc. And so any privatization effort or partial privatization effort would concern folks and potentially impact people's opinions of the Postal Service. We should note we're not the only country to be thinking about this or actually doing this. The British took the Royal Mail private back in 2013. They actually had an IPO that raised a couple of $1 billion. There has been more financial troubles there, but that has been successful for the most part. The Netherlands also privatized their postal service. Austria and Germany sold portions of their postal organizations to the public and private organizations. So there are some examples we can look to abroad here. But again, given just how efficient the Amazons, the FedExes, the DHLs are of the world, the idea here, and again, this is going to be much more controversial because the Republicans in Congress are going to have an issue here. But there are some ideas out there on how the Postal Service can become slightly more efficient and lose less money.
All right, time for the speed read from the New York Times. After reviewing thousands of tips, federal law enforcement officials this weekend said that mysterious drones spotted in New Jersey and surrounding areas in recent weeks pose no national security threat and in most cases are not even drones. Investigators reviewing video footage and interviews with witnesses have so far determined that at least some of the roaming objects are manned aircraft, things like airplanes and helicopters that had been misidentified as drones. That's according to officials from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. Federal officials have received nearly 5,000 tips on drone sightings in recent weeks and deemed that only 100 of them are worthy of further investigation. U.S. officials say they'd confirmed drone sightings over military bases in New Jersey, but had no evidence that the devices were operated by a foreign government or authority. Still, U.S. national security officials have not been able to identify the operators of the drones as people are becoming increasingly frustrated with a lack of information.
Yeah, I'm hearing from a number of you. State and local leaders are also speaking out, members of Congress, the governors of some of these states. You even had former governor of New Jersey, Chris Christie, out on ABC over the weekend saying, hey, I saw drones over my house a couple of mornings ago. They are irregular. The Biden administration saying that there's nothing here is not being forthcoming enough. It is allowing for conspiracy theorists to fill the void here. And Christie's concern, and I think it's a legit concern, is what he called drone vigilantes, that people feeling frustrated with the government are going to try to shoot down drones themselves when the vast majority of these drones might belong to law enforcement, belong to e-commerce, FedEx, Amazon, etc. And so with the government not being open enough about what they know, you did see Alejandro Mayorkas, the Secretary of Homeland Security, out over the weekend. But again, he was very dismissive in a way and very short in his answers. And so you had Chris Christie speaking after that interview over on the ABC This Week show Sunday. Here's a bit of what Chris Christie had to say.
The Biden administration and state authorities have to be more vocal and let people know exactly what they're doing. This interview this morning was a bit of a better step, but I think much too little too late. And when people see this kind of activity, it's a newish technology to most people, and they're worried about it and concerned. And to the extent they're following things around the world, they hear about drones being deployed in Ukraine all the time as weapons. And us deploying drones as weapons at times. So you can see why people are concerned, and it's a lack of communication from the government at the federal and state level that's at fault here.
Now, Christie did suggest that the Department of Homeland Security on a federal level needs more authority to deal with this from Congress. And he also said that the state authorities need more responsibility and ability to do more here. He said that New Jersey State Police should have the ability and power to shoot down the drones to figure out where these things are coming from, and they don't currently have that. Over on the New York side, you had New York Governor Kathy Hochul over the weekend saying the federal government would be deploying what she called state-of-the-art drone detection systems to New York to support investigations here. Now, Joe, one thing I should add, which is one of the reasons why this still feels new to folks, and again, I'm not questioning whether there's some of these are certainly sketchy and deserving of more investigation. The FAA changed the rules last year that some people might not be familiar with, that as of early 2024, so just a few months ago, drones are allowed to fly at night. So that's a new thing. And more than 10,000 drones fly at any given time in the U.S. Again, recreational ones that people own, military, police, e-commerce, Amazon, Walmart, FedEx. Some of the videos that are being pushed out on Twitter that have been sent to me, one appeared to just be the moon out of focus, but to some people it appeared like some sort of UFO type thing. Now, again, not dismissing the concerns, even though there are memes going around being like, the New Jersey guide to drones, and it's basically every type of flying machine. It's like drone. Because I just think everyone's trying to get on the mix. There's certainly people taking advantage of it with the recreational drones. Nonetheless, though, the government has not been open enough. The feds are just like, don't worry about it. And so if they could just admit maybe this is some sort of military training thing or just something else that's going on, I think that would calm some of the nerves here, because you're really seeing this, reach a fever pitch here in New Jersey. And as you mentioned, across the way in New York as well.
Yeah, Moshe, I shared one of your videos from the Instagram feed, and I asked people if they'd seen anything on Long Island, because I was hearing from friends being like, do you know anything? I heard it's over Westbury or Comac or this. And people started to message me in that their WhatsApp groups were going crazy and their neighborhood groups were going crazy. And whether they're just looking up for the first time and noticing what's in the sky,
they're like,
or there's actually more drones out there remains to be seen. But yeah, the government not being forthcoming about this has really gotten people nervous.
Yeah, and the fact that you do have some members of Congress and governors being like, please, like, guys, like Biden, White House, just like, tell us what is happening here. Is the right hand not talking to the left hand? And that's the thing. We did a special mode news interview podcast last year on the history of UFOs in America. And the majority of them can be explained by just the U.S. government having secret programs. And in many cases, just like not being open about what they're working on. But to the average person, unfamiliar with that, there's aliens and there's this and there's that. So I think this is another case where, and I think Chris Christie has a point, which is the longer in this period of time in 2024, in the era of social media, that a government stays silent, the quicker, conspiracies can come out. And so I've gotten notes from people saying, I hear that the drones are from Iran and trying to attack our nuclear plants. I'm just like, no. I mean, literally you had the Republican Congressman, Jeff Van Drew from New Jersey, and that's since been dismissed as not right. But you had a sitting congressman who was like, I hear there's an Iranian mothership off the coast of the U.S. sending out these drones, sort of like I had Independence Day in my mind, like these large motherships with smaller drones. That turns out not to be true. But the fact that information is not even being shared with members of Congress is an issue here.
From the Associated Press, ABC and its top anchor, George Stephanopoulos, have reached a settlement with Donald Trump in his defamation suit. And this comes after Stephanopoulos inaccurately said on air that Trump had been found, quote, liable of rape in a civil case in Manhattan last year. According to the settlement, ABC News will pay $15 million as a charitable contribution to a presidential foundation and museum for Trump, and then pay $1 million for his attorney fees. The suit stems from a conversation between Stephanopoulos and South Carolina Congresswoman Nancy Mace on ABC's This Week in March. Mace had spoken publicly about being raped as a teenager, and Stephanopoulos asked her in an interview why she continued to support Trump after he was found liable for, quote, rape in a case against him. In the case he was referencing, a federal jury found Trump liable for both sexually abusing and defaming writer E. Jean Carroll, although it did not find him specifically liable for rape. However, the judge who oversaw the case clarified that because of New York's much more narrow legal definition of rape, the jury's verdict did not mean that Carroll had failed to prove that Trump raped her, given how most people actually define it.
Yes, the judge essentially opened the door there to be like, well, it basically is, but it's not specifically according to New York law. And various states have different specific definitions when it comes to that type of crime. And so ultimately here, Trump sued ABC and Stephanopoulos, saying that they harmed his reputation by saying that multiple times during the interview, even though, again, they found him liable for sexual abuse, but not specifically for rape. And so ultimately, the thought was this was going to go to trial, but the settlement here avoids depositions. And so the settlement was made public over the weekend. There are some people at ABC who are a bit frustrated. Given the bar here, they thought they could actually win the case, but ABC and parent company Disney have decided to settle here. And so part of the settlement is also that they'll have to put a statement of regret as an editor's note related to all online articles related to that interview.
Staying with politics, this from NBC News. Former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi fell down a marble staircase while on a congressional trip to the European country of Luxembourg. She was rushed to the hospital with the injury. She is now recovering from hip replacement surgery in Germany. Her office has said she's continuing to work from her hospital bed and regrets that she won't be able to attend the remainder of the event that she arrived for, which was to honor veterans who fought in the Battle of the Bulge. Her uncle Johnny was killed during the battle.
We should note Pelosi is 84. She turns 85 years old in March. And it comes as earlier last week, the Republican Senate leader, Mitch McConnell, fell himself and sprained his wrist. This was back in the U.S., though, but it comes as really reinforces to all of us the age of folks in Congress. Right now, the average age of the current House, we'll get the updated numbers in January, is 58 years old. The average age of the Senate is 65 years old, which is they're both pretty significantly higher than the median age of the country, which is 39 years old. Now, the age of Congress has dropped by about 3 years from the previous Congress. So we'll see what the new Congress in January brings. And just for those keeping score at home, the oldest member of Congress is Iowa Senator Charles Grassley, a Republican. He is 91 years old.
From the Associated Press, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed this weekend that American officials have been in direct contact with the rebel group that overthrew the Syrian regime of President Bashar al-Assad. The jihadist group known as HTS is an offshoot of al-Qaeda, and they have been designated as a terrorist group by the U.S. since 2018. But Blinken says it's important for the U.S. to speak with HTS about its conduct in Syria and how it plans to govern during this transition period, so that eventually there might be a peaceful democratic regime in the country. Blinken did not give details about the conversations Americans have been having with the Syrian rebel group. The U.S. has sanctions on HTS, which was once again an affiliate of al-Qaeda, because of its terrorist organization designation. Those sanctions, though, do not ban the U.S. from communicating with them.
And then on top of that, we still have an active $10 million reward for the arrest of the guy who effectively is running Syria now, known as al-Jilani or Shara, his previous name. But it ultimately looks like at least this current U.S. administration, we'll see what Trump intends to do starting January 20th, like they got to deal with the new guys here. Syria is a mess. You got 20 plus million people there. You got ISIS there. You got U.S. troops there. You got al-Qaeda there. You got the Russians there, the Iranians there, Hezbollah, Hamas. Basically, it is a mess in Syria. And so the U.S. administration has decided, you know what? We should probably talk to these guys. Notably, HTS, the reason why they spun off from al-Qaeda, they had a disagreement between them and al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda is like, yo, priority number one is attacking America, destroying America. HTS says, listen, we agree with you guys, al-Qaeda, on a lot of stuff, including Islamist government, basically having Sharia law, etc. But we think priority number one should be making Syria Islamist, and then, maybe dealing with America someday in the future. So interestingly, as you look at this, there's an opportunity here for the U.S. to kind of double down on that divide, potentially aid HTS, given that HTS, again, has said we're not really into, or at least not prioritizing, attacking America like our al-Qaeda godparents. And so we'll see what happens here. They're going to try to deal realistically with what's going on. It does feel like, based on the Trump approach to things, talking to Kim Jong-un, talking to the Russians and Putin, that ultimately this probably continues into the Trump administration here. Jill, one more note before we leave Syria. A remarkable find last week: an American walking barefoot in Syria. He was in prison. His name is Travis Timmerman. He's a 29-year-old from Missouri. He went missing a year ago. He was last seen over the summer in Budapest. There were signs up in Missouri, actually, missing signs. His family said, if you see Travis, let us know. They had literally no idea where he was. They had no idea he was in Syria. It turns out he made a Christian pilgrimage to Lebanon. He then gets caught up in a Syrian prison, and they find him. last week as all the prisons were basically opened up in Syria with the end of the Assad regime. This guy walking around barefoot, an American, they catch up with him. His mother calls it a Christmas miracle, saying she's crying happy tears, hoping to be reunited with him very soon. He said that he wasn't treated that poorly in a Syrian prison by Syrian prison standards, though he was only allowed 3 bathroom breaks a day. Again, these are prisons that are known for torturing and starving people. More to this Timmerman story, I imagine, as he makes his homecoming. Jill, there continues to be a search for American journalist Austin Tice, who's been missing for more than a decade in Syria. His family is still looking for details on whether he's alive and where he was kept. And so that's another story we'll be watching out of Syria in the coming weeks.
In other international news from NPR, South Korea's parliament voted Saturday to impeach President Yoon Suk Yeol. It comes less than 2 weeks after the president imposed martial law on his citizens for a few hours, a move that has not been done in 45 years when the country was ruled by military dictators. It was quickly reversed by an assembly vote just hours after the president announced martial law. The impeachment vote passed 204 to 85 in the National Assembly, including about a dozen members of his own party. So effective immediately, Yoon had his presidential duties suspended. Those duties will be taken over by the prime minister, who becomes acting president. And now South Korea's constitutional court has 180 days to rule in favor or against the impeachment. If they rule in favor of it, there will be another election within 60 days.
So Yoon's old experiment on martial law lasted a few hours. Now he's been impeached. Womp womp. And he was clashing with the opposition party, trying to make a statement on passing his stuff. Turns out this was a pretty bad move by him. And he's somebody who already had 50 to 20% approval ratings going into this whole thing. South Korea, no stranger to impeaching presidents. This is their third impeachment in 20 years. As you mentioned, Jill, the court has to either reinforce it or reject it. In the two previous impeachments in the past 20 years, one was approved, one wasn't approved. This one looks like it will go over. So Yoon will have to say bye-bye, and there'll be a new election soon. But they are looking to follow up here because they're taking this very seriously, including arresting his former defense minister. And they've also barred him from leaving the country. South Korea wants to put the whole idea of martial law and even the concept of it behind them and leave it in the 70s, which is when the last time they went through this.
From Variety, an interesting connection between suspected United Healthcare CEO killer Luigi Mangione and Sean Diddy Combs. Their defense attorneys are married to one another. Mangione's newly retained New York lawyer, Karen Friedman Agnifilo, is married to one of Diddy's defense attorneys, Mark Agnifilo. Mark is part of Diddy's defense team in the music mogul's high-profile sex trafficking and racketeering case. Karen is representing Mangione in his New York case, where he's charged with second-degree murder in the fatal shooting of Brian Thompson in Manhattan. And Karen is representing Mangione in his New York case, where he is charged with second-degree murder for the fatal shooting of United Healthcare CEO Brian Thompson.
But for now, Mangione is still in Pennsylvania. He's fighting extradition. He might waive that soon. So he has an attorney in Pennsylvania, a pretty high-profile attorney there. Now he has Friedman Agnifilo in New York, who has an impressive resume herself. She was the chief assistant district attorney for the Manhattan DA's office before she joined her husband's firm. She also, you might recognize her from CNN, where she appears as a legal analyst. And she happened to be on CNN last week. And this was interesting because this was an interview she did before she was hired, ostensibly by the family, though they won't admit who is paying her legal fees here. She said that given all the evidence, it's pretty clear that he's connected to the crime scene. His fingerprints, the gun, the various statements that he was found with, the camera surveillance footage, him shouting at the media, effectively. And so with all that, here is what she threw out as a potential defense.
As a former prosecutor in that office, I would be concerned that you have someone who is a valedictorian of his class. He was brilliant his whole life. He comes from this great family. I mean, something changed, right? Significantly, something changed. And they're going to, I think, potentially have a not guilty by reason of insanity potential defense. So the prosecutors are going to try to shore that up as well.
So she proposed an insanity defense for him. Of course, that was, again, before she was retained. So we'll see what happens. Notably, Jill, this a very high-profile couple, Mark dealing with Diddy, Karen dealing with dealing with Mangione here. Not the first time their legal lives have overlapped. Back in 2018, Mark Agnifilo represented Harvey Weinstein while his wife Karen was still at the DA's office, which was prosecuting Weinstein, though she did recuse herself from that case. Jill, fascinating dinner conversations, I imagine, in their household.
I feel like they're probably very coveted dinner party guests.
Okay, you lead the conversation for the first half of dinner. You lead it for the second half in dessert. First, let's hear about Mangione. But I mean, the thing is, ultimately, if they're good attorneys, they're probably not sharing much with their friends and family. But come on, tell me something.
A couple of drinks, but a couple of drinks later.
Give us something.
And finally, from CNBC, coffee prices are rising higher than ever and show no signs of slowing down. The futures for Arabica coffee beans, which is what they use for espressos and other barista-made drinks, hit a high of nearly $3.50 per pound on Tuesday, which is the highest price in nearly 50 years. As a result, coffee companies like Nestle, which owns Nescafe and Nespresso, are saying that they're going to continue raising prices for consumers and make coffee packs smaller to offset higher prices, aka shrinkflation. The high costs are due to droughts and high temperatures this year in coffee-growing regions like Brazil, which is the world's largest coffee producer. Brazil experienced the worst drought in 70 years in August and September, and then rains in October.
Yeah, so you got a big climate change issue here. You got droughts, frost, flood, high temperatures, other unpredictable weather right now playing a major role in Brazil. And then in the other place that is a major coffee producer, Vietnam. And Vietnam grows what they call the Robusta beans, which are slightly lower quality beans used for more instant coffee. So you have the Arabica, you have the Robusta in both areas, Brazil and Vietnam. Major weather, tumultuous weather now going 5-6 seasons, leading to bad harvest. Translation for all of you, probably if you haven't already seen the price of coffee going up between 50 cents to $1 a pound in the coming days. And it's going to take years here for the prices to come back down. From coffee to tea here on this day in history. On this day in 1773, the Boston Tea Party took place. American colonists, many disguised as Mohawk Indians, board a British ship and dumped 342 chests of tea into Boston Harbor to protest the Tea Act and British taxation without representation. We should mention the amount of tea that Sam Adams and company dumped into Boston Harbor would be worth $2 million in today's dollars. So the British none too happy with that. And in response to the dumping of the tea, they responded with new taxes and acts, leading us to revolution just a couple years later there. All right, on this day in history, 1960s, a scary incident over New York. 2 airplanes collide over New York City, killing 134 people on the planes and on the ground. It was a very snowy morning in New York as a plane from Chicago headed to what would become JFK Airport. And then there was a separate TWA plane headed from Dayton to LaGuardia Airport. Due to the weather, one plane was put into holding pattern. The other pilot miscalculated the location of the pattern, and they would collide. Notably, Jill, we were still very early on with air traffic control at that point. And so in the early 60s, you still had a situation where pilots were navigating part of the trip themselves. Now, of course, from takeoff to landing, pilots are in touch with air traffic control. One of the major reforms that came out of that accident. And we end here with a bit of movie history. On this day in 1988, Rain Man with Dustin Hoffman and Tom Cruise premiered in theaters. You might have seen the film, Dustin Hoffman playing an autistic savant. He would go on to win the Oscar, Hoffman would, for his performance there and raise awareness of autism. Though he has noted today, he's not sure today they would cast a non-autistic actor in that role. And Hoffman actually had a difficult time, he admits in subsequent interviews, figuring out the role. He almost quit and actually suggested to the filmmakers that they use Richard Dreyfuss for the role of Raymond Babbitt in Rain Man, saying he didn't think he was doing a good job with it. He was too caught up in the research. Ultimately, though, Jill, remarkable film, and he would go on to win that Oscar. And some slightly lighter movie news, the answer to your clue from earlier, turning 30 years old today, Dumb and Dumber. Jim Carrey, Jeff Daniels.
Moshe, home to many a classic line. Like, so you're saying there's a chance. Is that even the line? Is it where you're telling me there's a chance?
Right, because she said like 1 in a million. So you're telling me there's a chance. And then she asked him to drive her to Aspen. And he says, Aspen, California. I haven't seen it in a long time. I know there was Dumb and Dumber 2. I don't think I ever caught Dumb and Dumber 2. But that was a film, Jill, I remember owning in the VHS days and watching over and over and over again with my brother.
I feel like it's a movie that may have been in Bashar al-Assad's collection. We have to go back and look.
For those of you who missed it, as the Syrian people had a chance to basically raid his palace last weekend, somebody caught a glimpse of part of the Assad family's DVD collection. I posted a photo, not all of it, but there were probably like 20 films there in the DVD collection. We posted on Instagram, and he had a lot of action films. He also had Borat in the mix.
Borat threw me.
And so some people thought it was funny because Sacha Baron Cohen also stars in a film called The Dictator, which is sort of like a mock of a Assad-like dictator. And so, I actually, don't disagree. I think that Dumb and Dumber seems like Bashar Assad speak. One of the only things you and I might share in common with Bashar Assad. We've all seen Dumb and Dumber.
All right, everybody. That is a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. If you like what you hear, share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and review us in the App Store.
See everybody tomorrow.